This video is about why you need to be cautious of how much self-help content you consume online. Self-help content can feel like therapy when you're trying to make a change in your own life. I went through a very transformative period back a few years ago in 2020 during COVID where I took to reading tons of self-help books, watching guru content constantly, and radically changing my habits and behaviors to try to redefine my life, my values, and my habits. I had lost my job as a result of the pandemic, and this was an abrupt shock as I had finally secured my first full-time position out of college at the time. At first, I wasn't really fazed by losing my job, or maybe I was just trying to convince myself that I wasn't. It wasn't the best outcome, but I was determined to make the best out of the hand that I was dealt. I had lost my job, the world was shutting down due to COVID, and the version of my future self that I'd pieced together in my head was like becoming unraveled in a ways. And so it felt like it was my obligation to make the best out of the situation, and I knew that I had more time on my hands, and I knew that I desperately wanted to become a better content creator, a better artist, and I wanted to make better choices in my life, and I wanted to learn about a lot of things that I hadn't really had the time to learn about up until that point. And this is where my journey with radical self-improvement began, and on the surface, radical self-improvement seemed like an ambition with no possible negative consequences. I was simply looking to spend more time developing the things that I thought would make me a better version of myself. I was looking to develop a morning routine, write down my goals, track my progress, try to pick up some new skills, maybe learn some new hobbies. And these were all things that I wanted to do, but now I finally had the time to execute. So, joblessness aside, I was genuinely excited for this new chapter in my life where I could get more time for myself to work on improving my productivity, increasing my efficiency, and honing in on my creative abilities. Initially, I had found myself a little unsure of where I should go first. I was at square one, and like any journey in life, getting started is always the hardest part, So not knowing where to start, I began consuming copious amounts of self-improvement content. I would scroll through the Instagram and TikTok feeds of Gary Vaynerchuk and others alike. I'd watch their live streams. I'd watch video after video of motivational content. I was ordering books on finance and philosophy and meditation. And just like that, I was on fire. I religiously followed all of the rules and instructions of the videos and the books. I was waking up early. I was writing down my goals. I was planning out my weeks. It was like planning out by an hour-by-hour basis. I was feeling better than I had in a long time. Hell, I felt even better than I did when I had a job. I was more regimented than ever before in my entire life, and I genuinely felt like I was making progress in my own life by developing these habits that were making me better, right? So, I felt passionate, I was motivated, I was focused, I was working out every day, I was doing research on things I was interested in, I was buying supplements, and, like I said before, continuing to scroll these feeds of these influencers, who were there to help me be the best me, the real me, the superior version of myself that was buried deep inside of me all along, that I just had to, unlock by changing my bad, poor habits. And for a while, that is genuinely what it felt like I was becoming. I know it sounds ridiculous. And so I'm doing all of this, and, I start to tell my friends about this, journey that I'm on, and expecting them to kind of be encouraged to make the same strides in their own life. And I was appalled to find them, genuinely interested because they're my friends, but, these conversations would quickly switch subjects and move on to something else. And this shocked me, why would others, sleep in and be lazy and do leisure activities with their free time when they could clearly see the great things I was doing for myself? And to be quite honest with you, I started to look down on the people that I called my friends because I was starting to see them as these unmotivated people just kind of wading through life, wasting their existence in mediocrity. In my mind, I was better than others simply because I wanted to be better than others. I started even turning down invitations from friends to hang out because, I was busy doing the most important thing of all, improving myself. Or at least that's what I felt like I was doing. And it took a few weeks before I started to realize the truth of my situation, and that is that nothing significant in my life had changed at that point. I hope you're enjoying this discussion so far. Before we keep going, let me just introduce myself. I'm Will Hinson. I make content to empower young men. We talk about confidence, purpose, and decision making on this channel in a way that's real and honest. If you're figuring things out to that effect and you want deeper conversations that can actually help you, you're in the right place. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if these are things that you find value in. All right, so let's go back to the video. Nothing had changed. Nothing at all. I was still jobless. I was still stuck at home, unable to go anywhere, do anything. I hadn't done much aside from spend a bunch of money on some books and fill up my library shelves and, basically just micromanage myself to this extreme extent. And not only was nothing changing, suddenly after, a handful of weeks, I was starting to lose my creative drive that was causing me to kind of go down this path in the first place, but how... and this was breaking my brain. How could I be losing motivation? I was the most motivated person I knew, surrounded by an online community of other people who wanted to outperform everyone else just like I did. And whenever my motivation would start to waver, I would dive right back into all that self-help content that I'd consumed that got me to that point. But after weeks of reading book after book and watching video after video and taking course after course, and consuming as much information as I possibly could, I slowly became less and less satisfied with what I was doing. I was creating and completing these goals really just for the sake of completing goals. It was just to feel like I was accomplishing something, not to actually really get anything done at that point. I had designed all these goals around my own passions and interests, and I began to realize I was no longer working on the things that I loved because of the fact that I love them, but rather to kind of give myself this illusion of accomplishment by just checking off some goal I had wrote down earlier in the week. And instead of my goals becoming a blueprint for being a better creator, they actually ruin the enjoyability of the creative process, which is supposed to be organic and fun. So my entire focus became centered around just completing the goal just to cross it off the list, rather than to grow or learn. I feel like I almost had an addiction to creating a task just for the sake of completing the task. Because I would rush through them, I would look for the fastest way to complete every single task just so I could cross off the list and move on to the next one. I was really only finding my fulfillment in checking that box rather than doing the actual thing on the list. And then I would find myself just honestly doing the exact opposite of everything I was scheduling out for myself, which then made way for, the feelings of guilt and self-doubt. I had canceled plans and neglected my friends and family in order to work on these projects, and now suddenly I don't even care about the projects anymore. And then at that point, I just felt like I was going crazy. Every possible decision that I could make felt like the wrong one. And so I just really started to crash, after riding that confidence high for so long. And then I couldn't even get myself to do anything at all. And I hear these stories and you hear these tall tales of an old man's on his deathbed reflecting on his life, and he realizes he never actually pursued his interests. Regretful, he wishes he could explore his childhood passions. Dying miserably, he finally understands life's true meaning. And that's a pretty rough story, right? And it's hard to not subconsciously put yourself in that story when you hear something like that or something similar. You feel the anxiety of the old man. And as a young adult, when you hear that story, all of a sudden you're like, well, I need to make the perfect choices right now. I don't want to be that old guy who's regretting not doing something. I need to do what I want to do. And, it's problematic because that narrative suggests that you could be living a wrong version of your life without even knowing it. And I feel like this is almost a shame-based marketing tactic, And stories like these are just trying to convince you lock in or die with regret. And I think it's just capitalizing on the insecurity that maybe motivated you to seek out this type of content or help in the first place. And so then, pushing expensive courses and books and online solutions to those in emotional distress or financial hardship is, just another way that people can get taken advantage of even further beyond their initial problems. When you're consuming this self-improvement content, which ironically is what I guess I'm making right now, a lot of times the content is really focused around this state of current inadequacy. The narrative is that like your current version of yourself is like defective in a way. And regardless of the changes that you make in your real life, the content being made that you're watching, this narrative persists. Gurus don't create personalized content for you. If you're making progress, like their content is still going to be aimed, you're a piece of shit, you need to keep working hard. And I'm not saying that these content creators are like ill-intentioned, but this can harm the viewers by perpetuating this notion that like your current state is not good enough. Self-improvement content can trick you into believing that you're less satisfied with your life than you should be. I mean, yeah, your situation could be better. Your situation could always be better. That is an unchanging fact. The self-help industry, which, has the development products and services, it has experienced significant growth. And we're often comparing ourselves to others in our niche, and we're exposing ourselves to people who are better and more successful and seemingly happier than us all the time. And this comparison can lead to these feelings of inadequacy and make us wonder why we don't get the same opportunities, or we're not living the same life, or we're not as happy as this person seems to be. And the self-help industry capitalizes on that insecurity by offering the motivational content and the false sense of progress through the books and the courses and the videos and the TikTok. And while these tools can temporarily boost our self-esteem, I think they ultimately do lead to this cycle of relapse when the feelings fade. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that self-help content is bad. It's what I'm trying to make right now. But we have to stay in tune with ourselves and what works for us. So when I started developing habits that gave me the illusion of forward progress, I truly felt like I was bettering myself. But I was really just making myself to be more like the people I saw on the screen instead of someone that I decided for myself that I want to be. But here are my positive takeaways from the journey, because there are some. A few of the easiest things that you can do today to marginally improve your quality of life are exercising, exposing yourself to sunlight every day, drinking water, and trying to eat mostly whole foods. Trying to optimize your lifestyle beyond those 4 things is really just going to be difficult and marginal if you haven't already started with those basic pillars. And it's unrealistic to expect someone who is on the internet, who's never met you, that's making content for a broad audience, to tell you specifically what you need to magically do to make yourself feel better instantly. There's no magic formula that can just instantly transform your life into this fake perfection that we see on social media, because it's not real. So I share this story with you, hoping that it helps to encourage you to take action beyond just content consumption, but actions that you specifically tailor to your life, that you design to help you accomplish your goals that you set for yourself, not what someone online tells you should be doing. So if you've watched this video all the way through, I want to say thanks so much, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.